I think that was some of the biggest challenges that we had to face. We had to really begin to dissect, what does that really mean? While legacy and ministry is a blessing, you're gonna have some of those challenges with some of those references or some of those variables.
Hey, and welcome to yet another episode of the Church Systems Podcast, where we give you simple solutions to help you tackle ministry's toughest challenges. I'm your host, Henry Tolbert, and today we're going to be tackling a really critical issue. We're going to be talking about why most churches are planning to fail. Yes. You heard that right. I know it sounds crazy because you're thinking like nobody would plan to fail. But here's the truth. If you're not effectively planning, and more specifically, if you're not embracing strategic planning, then guess what? You're planning to fail. You're preparing to not see everything come together in the way that it should and in the way that it could. And today we're going to dive into it and we're going to talk about it. Listen to this quote. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. This is often attributed to Benjamin Franklin. But the reality is that this is true for most churches, is most churches aren't planning well, and as a result, they're not seeing the impact that they want to see. I'll give you an example. I was speaking at a conference, I think a few months back, and I said to a group of church leaders, I said, the fact that most churches don't have a plan for people to learn the basics of faith when they come into the church communicates that they're not planning to reach unchurched people. Most churches that I encounter are equipped for transfer growth and not conversion growth. Because when transfer growth is easy. It's just, people having something different from the church that they had before. But conversion growth is about taking somebody who may not know a single thing about the faith or a single thing about Jesus, but the Holy Spirit is drawing them in and being prepared to walk them from step one forward. And most churches don't have a plan for that. And when you don't have a plan for that, you're prepared to fail. You're not prepared to win and to see the impact that you could see. But that might be true right now, but it won't be true by the end of this episode because I'm going to give you the strategy and the tools that you need. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you my entire framework for how we help churches strategically plan and to build out the framework for where they're going over the next 12 months. All right, buckle your seatbelts. This is going to be a lot of fun. So as you've probably heard me say before, I made the shift to play college athletics and play football at many different levels. So I started off when I was 9 years old playing, Little League, Pop Warner football, moved from there to playing high school, moved from high school to playing college, and even eventually had an opportunity to go to rookie mini camp with the Cincinnati Bengals and went to go and try out with the Kansas City Chiefs a couple times, all these kind of things, right? But here's the point that I'm making. When we come and we're really talking about planning, right? And we're talking about really breaking through and coming to the other side. Then one of the things that you've got to understand that I've seen is that a huge part of the difference between one level and another is the amount of planning that goes into it. When I played Little League football, man, it was all about fun. It was all about just enjoying yourself. It was about learning the sport. Is about learning, the basics and all the positions and all these kind of things. And that was really cool. And when I got to high school, yes, it's about learning fundamentals and adjusting to your new size and speed. But we had to study a little bit. We had to watch film once a week, look at at the team that we were getting ready to play. And for the most part, we trust the coaches to tell us what we needed to do, the plays we needed to run. And then when I got to college, it went to a whole nother level. Every person who was at Grambling they were some of the best at their high schools. And so we went from in high school watching film maybe once a week to college watching film every day. And that included watching it with the coaches and watching it by yourself, watching yourself to figure out what you can do better, watching your opponent to see what they wanted to do. And then when you get to the NFL, it's a completely different animal. You have, film on your devices, on your iPad, on your phone, all these kinds of things, because now it's your life. You're not just playing for fun. You're not just playing for an education. You're playing now to take care of your family. And here's the reason that I'm mentioning that is because it shows us how detailed and how different it is when you approach something to say, I'm just doing it, and you approach something to say, hey, this is a part of what I'm called to do. This is a part of my life. And I know that you're called to be in ministry. You're called to lead a church. You're called to make a difference in the lives of the people around you. And what I'm here to challenge you with in this episode is to challenge you to think more strategically and to be more intentional about strategically planning. Again, when I talk about strategically planning, a plan says, let's do this. But a strategic plan says, let's do this in the context of everything else that we're doing so that it all fits together. And so you want to be strategic. You don't want to just be randomly planning, oh, there's an event and there's an event, and these things are all disjointed and disconnected. When you strategically plan, you're looking at the big picture of how everything fits together. And I believe that makes a huge difference. All right. So let me start by talking about why strategic planning is so crucial. It's not just about setting goals. And I know sometimes when you say strategic planning, people hear different things. It's not just about setting goals. It's really about creating a roadmap. It's about creating a roadmap. It's great that we want to go beyond 100 people. It's great that we want to have 50% of our church serving as volunteers. It's great that we want to have 70% of our congregation in a small group. That's great. But how are we going to get there? Right? When you talk about strategic planning, what you're talking about, what you're saying is that let's lay out a map. Let's lay out a path. Let's get really crystal clear on not just what we want to do, but how we're going to do it. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring alignment. And this is a word that you'll hear me say over and over again in a bunch of different episodes, but we want to bring alignment to our resources, alignment to our people, alignment to our energy. We want to bring alignment to all these different things so that everybody in the church is working towards the same vision. One vision, many parts, one body. We're trying to move towards one vision, and strategic planning really, really helps us get there, right? So before I give you this blueprint for how you can strategically plan, I'm telling you, it's going to knock your socks off. You're going to really love this. It's going to be really good. But let's talk about some of the things that really get in the way. And I'm going to frame this as really talking about why you need strategic planning and why. And so what are some of the things that strategic planning can really help answer for you? Because there are some pitfalls that you run into when you plan poorly. All right. Number one of the reasons that you need to strategically plan is that your team needs direction. Your team needs direction. Without the proper direction, you can have a team full of gifted, well-intentioned, kind people who accomplish nothing, right? You need their team needs real direction from you, right? I've been on teams that had all the talent, but we didn't have direction. We weren't moving in the right direction together. And as a result, it didn't all come together. And the same can be true in the church. Your team needs direction. And so when you strategically plan, what you're doing is that you're giving them direction so that you can free them to go and be who they're called to be. Can I be honest with you? And I want you to just hear my heart, because I'm saying all this because I care about you. I care about the church, and I want to see the church become what God had in mind when Jesus gave birth to it. And here's one of the things I want you to know. Some of the greatest teams in the world are held back by leaders who plan poorly. Right? I said this a couple years ago at a conference. I said it's not fair that because a pastor waits until the week of the series or the night before Sunday to come up with a title, that all the gifted people around them, they don't get a chance to execute their gifts. It's not fair. If you just took something as simple as sermon planning, if you would just take a moment and get away with God and say, Lord, what do you want me to share for this year? What do you want me to preach just over the next 3 months? What do you want me to preach? The same Holy Spirit who can talk to you on Saturday night can talk to you 3 months ahead of time. I hope you know that, right? And if you do that, though, here's what it unlocks. Now, because I'm doing this series, and this series, you can now give that to your team. And now the person who does your graphics has more time to really put themselves into it. Now the person who does social media can come alive because they can put together a plan. Now your worship director can actually start to match up the music with the message so that you're on the same page. When you plan well, it's one of the ways that you activate all of the other gifts around you. And conversely, when you don't plan well, it's one of the ways you deactivate all the gifts around you. Creative people stop being creative when planning is not done well, right? And so you want to be aware of that. It's how you really keep your people engaged and how you can re-engage people. Plan well. Let them know, hey, here's where we're going. Here's the framework. Now you go and do what God has called you to do. You've got to give people space. And a lot of times, unfortunately, as a leader, you can end up being the bottleneck. You can end up being the stopping point for things moving forward in the ministry. All right. So that's one reason. Here's another thing that happens is that, when you don't plan well, your team, your people, they get stuck doing busy work. Right. Just stuff where they're doing stuff that, that maybe needs to be done, but it's not something that's really challenging and stretching them and allowing them to use their gifts. And so you need to be aware of that, right? And you need to understand that your team needs direction. Here's the other thing is you need a consistent message, right? You need a consistent message. And this is what strategic planning does, is that when you strategically plan, you're looking at the whole picture. And because you're looking at the whole picture, you can make sure that there's a connecting thread through all the different things that you're doing. You need consistent messaging. When you don't have a strategic plan, what ends up happening is you say one thing 1 minute and another thing the other minute and another thing the other minute and another thing the other minute and another. And what ends up happening just becomes confusing. And you know what happens when people get confused? A confused mind always defaults to no. And people stay back and they don't engage the way that they could simply because they're confused. And so you need to make sure that you're giving the clarity with the planning that you can. When you plan intentionally, one of the things that it does is that it helps set the direction for everything else, and it helps move everything in one direction. Sermon series, church events, graphics, all of it. It all lines up when there is a strategic plan and there's a strategic focus that goes along with it, all right? One of the ways that we have kind of introduced this to our partners at our Church Systems Bootcamp is that every year we do something called the Fall Launch. And with the Fall Launch, and this we've done this a couple times now, but with the Fall Launch, one of the things that we do is that we plan one big series together, and several of our churches, any of our churches who want to participate, and we give them the graphics, we give them the social media templates, we give them the slide presentations, we give them the lower thirds, we even come together and put together sermon notes. We do everything together and we put it in their hands. And I say to them and to their teams, how much different is this series from every other series that you've done? Because everything is already put together. You can tell that everything is unified. You can tell that everything is together, and it just opens up a whole other wave of creativity, and you want to do that. All right. Here's a third reason that you really, really need to strategic plan is because you cannot afford to waste resources. You cannot afford to waste resources, and poor planning often wastes resources. It wastes your money, it wastes your time, it wastes your energy, and it wastes your people. So you've got to make sure that you understand you don't have time to waste resources. I don't know about you, but I don't have money, I don't have energy. I've never been a pastor in a space where I could waste money, time, energy, people, any of those things. Those things are at a premium. They're really valuable, they're really important, but you've got to make sure that you steward them well. And a part of stewarding them well is that you've got to make sure that you're preparing. I think back years ago when I was pastoring a church plant, And there was a local organization who reached out to us and said, hey, well, really, this lady came to me and said, hey, would you guys partner with us? I want you to come and be a part of this outreach program. It's going to be amazing. We're going to serve the city. And she was just telling me all these things we're going to do. And I was excited. She seemed well-meaning enough. And I was super excited to be a part of it. And so I was like, yeah, we'll do it. We'll bring some people. And so I rallied the troops, right? That was one of the things we were known for. Anytime outreach was happening, we were going to bring, at that time, maybe at least 50 people were coming with us, and we were going to really, because we were known for really serving the city. We get to this event and we discover that very little planning had been done. I didn't ask enough questions, right? This is my first pastor. I didn't ask enough questions. So we get there and the volunteers we bring are 95% of the people who show up. The people who we were called to serve were not properly alerted that we were coming to serve them. And so we ended up just kind of standing around twiddling our thumbs and not really being able to make a difference in the way that we wanted to. And here's what I remember feeling. I remember looking around at our volunteers, and looking at the looks on their faces that were kind of like, why were we here? And I remember in that moment, I felt like I wasted some of our resources. I wasted some influence because the planning wasn't done well. And so I want to avoid that. And so with good planning, you can avoid wasting those resources. And I remember saying to myself, I don't want to feel that way again. I don't want to do that to our team. And so that was super important to us. Fourth and finally, last reason why you really need a strategic plan, and I'm going to show you how to do it, is you can't afford stagnant growth. I don't know if you know this or not, but every church, on average, this is a nationwide average, loses 10% of its congregation every year. You lose 10% of the people, even if you do everything right, you still likely will lose about 10%. You'll lose some people because they passed away, some people because they moved away for their job, some people because they just flat out got disgruntled, some people will go through a divorce, all schedule changes, some people will leave the faith, all these different things will happen. And on average, you lose 10%. So that means to just stay the same, right? Which is what we call stagnant, which is where we're not increasing or at the rate that's really far beyond what we're losing. But to just stay the same, you've got to add 10% every single year. And so here's what I'm saying. You can't afford stagnant growth. You can't afford seasons where things are being wasted and things aren't going forward. When you're in a season where you're just kind of coasting. Can't afford it. There's too much on the line. And when you don't strategically plan, when you don't plan to grow, it often doesn't happen. And so one of the things, and don't get me wrong, and I'm gonna address this in just a second. There's so much of this that is up to God, that is up to the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit is the one who will come alongside you and be there with you and walk with you and guide you and woo people to come to Jesus. And there are so many things that are on God. I'm talking about the parts of this that are on us. Growth has an element of intentionality. There's a reason that the churches who are serious about growing are often the ones who grow. There's a serious piece of intentionality that comes there. I from time to time I'll run Facebook ads and for some of our freebies, our free resources and stuff like that. And I tell you, if you're thin-skinned, never run Facebook ads, right? Because it brings to you some of the worst people you'll ever meet, right? And here's one of the things that I get all the time is that whenever I use the term church growth, I always get the trolls who say only God adds to the church. And that's their stance. Like, no, it's not our job to add to the church. Just preach the gospel, and that's enough. And while I hope that they're well-intentioned and they mean well, I think their response gives us some insight into this limited mindset that so many people in the church have today. And here's why I call it that. Because number one, their solution is just preach the gospel, just talk about Jesus, and that's enough. And they neglect all the other stuff around it about developing people, discipling people, being in community with people, just loving on people, just being a friend, right? Is the only way to reach me just to preach at me? What about just doing life with me, right? And just caring about me as a person and sitting at a ball game while our kids play, all those kind of things. But then the second thing is they completely reject that they have a responsibility, that we have a responsibility when it comes to the building of the church. They reject it. I love the scripture that says, hey, I want you to go into the highways and byways and compel them to come, that my table may be full. Jesus telling a story of this great banquet that he's prepared, but not having enough people to come. And he says, hey, look, those of you, my servants, I want y'all to go. I want you to tell people why, because I want a full table. And I think what Jesus is really talking about is people coming into relationship with him. But I think a part of that is the church is a part of that. The church is the vehicle. It is plan A, and there is no plan B for people to come into the kingdom and to be a part of the kingdom and to function as a part of the family. It's an institution that Jesus gave his life to give birth to. And a part of it, he says, hey, look, I want you to bring people into it. In the Great Commission, he said, go into all nations, into all these people groups. He said, I want you to tell them about me. I want you to bring them back. I want you to train them. I want you to raise them up and send them out to do the same thing. The Apostle Paul said, hey, take these truths that you got, and I want you to go find some other men that you can pour them into, and let them find some other men that they can pour them into, and let them find some other men that they can pour them into. There is an intentional reproducibility that comes along with the church. And so we've got to embrace our responsibility and understand we can't afford to have this stagnant growth. Here's one of the things that I think most of my trolls miss. I don't know about your trolls, but I'm just talking about my trolls right now. Here's one of the things I think a lot of them ignore. They ignore the fact that God has given us authority. That he's given us authority, that he has called us as his sent ones into this earth, into this place, into wherever he sends us. He has sent us with authority so that we can be the ones who go out and affect real change in the world around us. And you have that same authority, and you've got to use it. Here's something else I see, and I'm going to jump into this because I want you to get this, because this is so important. I see a couple of things when it comes to thinking about church growth. One of the things that I see is I see leaders who have been so beat up and disappointed that they have stopped believing that it's possible to impact growth in their churches. Man, and if that's where you are, I want you to know I'm praying with you. I'm praying for you. I'm praying because I know what it's like to have the courage almost beaten out of you, to have the courage and the fire and the zeal that you once had, to just have it slowly squeezed out of you as you go through year after year of challenges and opposition, and not just fighting people outside of the church, but having conflicts within the church. I know what it feels like right there. And I see so many leaders who have stopped trying to pursue reaching new people because of what they've gone through. And if that's where you are, I'm praying for you. And then I've also seen others who want to try and maybe want to do it, but they're in cultures that don't support it. And so what I want to try to do is I want to help you overcome those pitfalls by helping you see a better way, a simple way to strategically plan so that you can bring people in and pull them together. We use something that we call the Blueprint Builder. And with the Blueprint Builder, it's a template that I put together several years ago. And I use it for our annual retreat. Every year we go to Destin, Florida, and we spend a week living in a beach house with some of the leaders in our boot camp. And we do meals together. We go walking together. We go shopping together. We go and eat together. We just hang out, right? It's just we spend about the first 2 or 3 days just, as I say, letting our hair down, right? And so when I say letting our hair down, for me, it's a beard. For others, it might be actual hair. But we let our hair down. We ride go-karts, and we might go putt golfing or, bowling or whatever, right? But when we come out, we come in and we start planning. And so with the Blueprint Builder, what I did is that I organized a 12-month strategic plan around 5 Ps, right? 5 Ps, and these 5 Ps each represent a question. And so I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. But at the end of the episode, I'll share with you, if you would like us to help you put together your blueprint, if you want some extra help doing it, then I've got a resource that will help you do it. As a matter of fact, I will give you all of my resources. I'll give you my templates. I'll give you some training videos, all these different things so that you and your team can go through it. Maybe you use it for a retreat. Maybe you use it for your leadership meetings over the course of time. But we've got all those, and I'll share with you exactly how to do that. But we built it around 5 questions that all came to 5 Ps. All right, so let's walk through it. Number 1, the first P is people. People. The question you want to ask is, who are the people we want to reach? Who are the people we want to reach over the next 12 months, right? Now, I know when I ask most pastors who they want to reach, their first answer is everybody, right? We want to reach everybody. But here's the reality. Everybody is not a great fit for your church. So you need to be able to take a moment, and we know that the church is open to anybody. So I'm not talking about rejecting anybody. But what I'm asking you is, what's going to be your target? Right? Because here's what I know, the fox who chases 2 rabbits will catch neither one, right? That's the first idiom I think I learned when I was in elementary school, when I started figuring out what proverbs and idioms were. It's one of the first ones I learned. The fox who chases 2 rabbits will catch neither one. And really what that idiom is saying is that it takes so much focus to catch one rabbit. Trying to set your eyes on 2 at the same time is going to completely confuse you, and you're not going to catch either one of them. And so I'm saying the same to you. What I'm saying is, I want you to think about who the people are that your church is most equipped to reach. Who are you most equipped to reach? I know you want to reach everybody. And I talk to a lot of pastors, even today, who are pastoring older congregations. And they say, man, we want to reach young people. And one of the things that I often say to them is, you need to get your church ready first. Because you're telling me who you want to reach, but when I look at your church, it's built for somebody completely different. All right. Don't tell me, man, I want to, I was thinking about this just the other day. I was in the car. I've got this little small sports car that I ride in. And my wife laughs at me because she says I look like the Nutty Professor when I get out of it because, I'm this big dude and I get out of the car and I have to dip down and look. And she's like, man, you just look so big. It doesn't look like it fits. Right. Who fits in your church? And I know you want to be there for everybody. But who are the people you're uniquely gifted to reach? Are they men? Are they women? Are they single mothers? Are they young adults? Are they millennials? Are they people with small kids? Who are you equipped to reach? Because you can say, man, I want young families. Do you have ministry for kids? Young families are choosing churches more for their children than they are for themselves. Do you have some kind of children's ministry that's ready to handle the kids that you're saying you want to reach? And so what you want to do is you want to think about who you want to reach. And I challenge you to squeeze this down to 2 to 3 people groups, no more than that, right? Squeeze it down to 2 or 3 people groups and say, hey, look, here's who we want to focus on reaching this year. We want to focus on reaching this. And this is important because later we're going to plan some events and they're going to be based on these people groups. And so we're going to pull all this together. Again, this is strategic planning, meaning that everything goes together. So you need to think about who are the people you want to reach and you want to get serious about them because this is going to give us focus. This is going to give us focus. We're going to make sure that when we decide that this is who we want to reach, that we're going to start planning everything else around this so that we can go along with it. All right. So the first P is people. Who are the people we want to reach in the next 12 months? All right. Number 2, the second P is processes. Processes. What are the systems that we want to improve over the next 12 months? Sometimes improving and changing all the systems in your church can feel really overwhelming because systems can be as detailed or as vague as you want them to be, but really good ones, they take time, they take effort. And so instead of overwhelming yourself and becoming frozen with inaction because you feel so overwhelmed by all the things you got to do, what I challenge you to do is just think about a handful of systems that you really want to focus on over the the next 12 months. You don't have to do everything at once, but just do a few things that can really make a difference. And I think if you embrace those few things, it'll lead you to where you want to go. So what you want to do is you want to look at your church and you want to ask yourself, what are the processes we need to improve? You know, in our framework, in our philosophy, we believe that there are 10 systems to a healthy church. And so we really help in the Blueprint Builder, we show you those 10 systems and we challenge you to think about which 2 or 3 of these do you really want to focus on, right? For example, maybe you want to focus on your worship planning system, right? Because your service is too disjointed. You want to make it more dynamic so that you can really be able to hold people's attention and keep them engaged in what's happening. Well, start right there with that system. Why? Because if you improve your worship planning system, it's going to leak over into other areas. It's going to make it easier for people to decide to come in and be a part of worship, right? They're going to be able to connect in a different way. It's going to reach out into your volunteers, all these different things. But you just got to start with the systems that you know you can step into that would make a difference. In this way, I would treat them like a checklist. I would really complete them before I move on. I would really focus on really conquering and almost mastering a system before we move on to the next one. You know, in our church systems boot camp, one of the things that we do is that as we train on these systems, we have put them in order because we know that certain things need to go in a certain order. And so before we tell you that you can even touch the evangelism system, you've got to do the worship planning system first because we need to know what you're inviting people to come to. You need to do the assimilation system next because we need to know that you have a plan for new people before you ask them to come in, because if you bring them in before you have a plan for them, you're going to lose them anyway. And so what I'm challenging you to do is pick 2 or 3 of those systems and really lean into them. The second P is processes. Number 3 is projects. Projects. What are the events that we want to host to reach our target audience over the next 12 months? You know, I've seen this over and over again. As a child of the church, as somebody who grew up going to church at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning and getting home after 8 p.m. on Sunday night. I grew up going to Sunday school at 9, leaving Sunday school, going to the Hardee's down the street, grab breakfast, come back for service at 10:30 or 11, whatever time it was, leave that service. My mom was the musician, the minister of music for the church. So now the choir has to sing in a musical at 3 o'clock. And after we leave the musical at 3 o'clock, we come back at 5 because our church is on the radio with a live broadcast at 5 p.m. And then sometimes on Sunday night at 7, we've got to go to another musical or to another anniversary or some kind of program to go. And then eventually we made it home. We had a robust schedule, and a lot of churches have had a robust schedule. Now, that's changed a lot post-pandemic because people have a lot less time available for church activities, so they've kind of forced us into not doing as much. But here's what I want to challenge you to do, is I want to challenge you to be intentional about figuring out the kinds of events that are going to help you reach people. You know, I appreciate the events that I grew up on. I appreciate the men's days and the women's days and the youth days and things of that nature because they were really more about helping us enrich our relationship internally and sometimes our relationships with sister churches. So we do a men's day. We invite the men from other churches to come. But here's a challenge with that, and I'm not knocking it, but here's a challenge with that, is they weren't really evangelistic in nature. We're bringing people who are coming from one church or who are already in our church to be a part of this event. When that event is over, the people from the other church go back to their church, and we're right back where we were. And so what I'm challenging you to do is think more evangelistically. And I want you to sit in front of a calendar and really think about the days and the events that really make a difference to you, right? I'll show you some examples here in a second, and I'll show you, but I really want you to sit down and I want you to partner with your team. And instead of trying to plan 20 really average things that happen throughout the year, what if you had 4 events that really knocked it out of the park? Right? What if instead of having something every month, you did something once a quarter? But when you did it, you put 90 days of focus and planning and energy behind it. I believe that it would pay more dividends if you did it that way. And so that's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you to sit down and say, hey, here's where we're going to go. And you're going to tailor these events to the people you want to reach. You know, a couple years ago, when I did a strategic plan for our church, one of the groups we wanted to really reach were men between the ages of 35 to 55. We get really specific, right? And we put a scripture to it. We put goals and objectives to it. And you'll see all of that in the blueprint builder. I'll give you all of that. So all you gotta do is customize it to fit you. And so since we wanted to reach men, we opened the year with a Super Bowl party. And so at the start of the year, we had a Super Bowl party and we promoted it. And I told all the guys in our church, I said, hey, after service, I want you to plan to let your families go home and you stay here at the church. We're going to be barbecuing on the grill. I'm bringing my grill up here. We're going to just toss the football around. We're going to hang out. I just want to spend some time with you. And for us in that church, we ended up had a bunch of guys just come and hang out. And I told them, hey, look, if you know some other guys, you can bring them with you, come in. But that moment was driven towards the people that we said we wanted to reach. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you put action behind your vision. This is where your vision comes off the paper and becomes a real plan when you decide to say, hey, let's really make a difference in the lives of these people. And so what you want to think about is when you determine who those people are you want to reach, now you want to move to projects and you want to decide, hey, what are the events that we're going to host that are going to help us reach the people that we're trying to reach? So your third P is projects. So if you got people, processes, and projects, number 4 is going to be preaching. How will we preach for life change over the next 12 months, right? Now, this is where I challenge a lot of pastors because I know we're all different. Some of us, we like to consider ourselves more structured, some more free-flowing, all these kind of things. I want to challenge you, if you're not a series preacher, if you're not somebody who plans their preacher, I want to challenge you to just try it for 3 months. Just try it for 3 months. And that's what this P is about. It's about planning to preach for life change, right? Because it's really easy. And you don't realize this, but so much, if you don't strategically plan your preaching, so much of your preaching can be impacted by what's happening in you and around you in the moment. Is that you're waiting for inspiration, but a part of how you see that, because there's inspiration around you all the time, but a part of how you see that inspiration can be built on what you go through. And so what ends up happening is that you can end up having a plate full of all these things that doesn't matter. That don't fit, rather. They matter, but they don't fit. So imagine you came to my house for dinner and I put a plate in front of you and it had spaghetti, and then it had fish, and then it had soup, and then it had, maybe some kind of random noodles, and then it had a taco, and then there was a corn dog, and then there was a burger, and then there was just raw okra, right? All these random things. And you're like, what's the theme? I don't get it. Like, what's happening? Well, sometimes that's how preaching can become if you're not intentional. And so all I'm saying is, preach the same things you preach, but do it in a structured way so it helps you in your planning, but also so it helps your people learn. You've got to think about how people learn. And the way people learn is they need to hear something a few times before they get it. That's why series are so valuable. They're not so valuable just because they're cool. They're valuable because they help people retain information. So here's the thing. What's really the goal of your preaching? My argument is that the goal of your preaching should be to see people's lives change, to see people become more like Jesus, to see people really grow in what they were called to do. Speaking of Jesus, I think he models this. When you look at the ministry of Jesus, you can see that he preached very intentionally. I mean, just look at the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, he literally intentionally goes through these things that he knows will be foundational for those who choose to follow him. And so I'm challenging you to do the same thing. I'm challenging you to preach intentionally. And so with this, what you want to do is you want to go through and you want to plan your series and plan your preaching for the year, right? And if you've got other ministers, you can include them in this as far as letting them know ahead of time when they preach. Right? That's another pet peeve of mine, is how in so many churches, other ministers who are qualified, right? Because I know we need to be trained, we need to be developed. So I don't believe in putting anybody who's not trained and developed out front and setting them up for failure. But one of the ways that we set them up to win is if we give them a long runway. I think that's one of the differences sometimes between somebody who could be considered an amateur or a novice and somebody who could be considered a professional. It's the amount of time that it takes them to prepare. It's not just, sometimes it's the quality of their work, don't get me wrong, but it's time. Sometimes if you give a novice, if you give them enough time, they could produce really good work. But a professional, you don't have to give them a lot of time because they know it so well they could just do it, right? At this point in my life in ministry, you can ask me to preach 5 minutes before service starts and I can go and do it. But in the early days when I was just starting out, it felt really great to have a whole month to know I'm getting ready to do my trial sermon. And I used all 30 days to get ready for it. And so with this is how you develop your other ministers. Give them a long runway so you have time to talk with them, to wrestle with them, to work with them, to help them figure it out. But you've got to do that, right? You can't just be random and expect other people to get it. Here's what happens. When you operate in this random kind of popcorn brain type of setup, you might thrive in it, but most of the people around you will really struggle. And I'm telling you, the church moves forward when everybody can thrive and not just you. And so you want to make sure that you move people in the right direction. I believe all scripture is God-breathed. All of it is great. What I'm telling you and what I'm challenging you to do is organize so that people can learn. So that people can learn. You organize so that people can grab a hold to what you're teaching and so that they can celebrate with you and go with you. And so my suggestion is to preach in series that last around 4 weeks, and sometimes even mini series that are 2 to 3 weeks or something like that. I wouldn't go much longer. 6 weeks might be the cap for me. But you're preaching in series so that people know what's coming and they can follow along. They do it together. I'm telling you. If you get people engaged, it makes a world of difference, all right? Last one, so that was our preaching. So we've done people, processes, projects, and preaching. Last one, and this is so important, is provision. How will we raise the resources we need to do fruitful ministry over the next 12 months? It's all about really just being attuned to the resources in your church that are available to you and what you need to get where you want to go. When you strategically plan, one of the benefits of it is that you know what you need down the road, right? You know that, hey, if we're trying to go in a specific direction, here are some of the things that are going to help us get there. You know, you need a budget for your music ministry. You need a budget for, a new sign outside. You need a budget for building repairs. All of those things can be there, right? But as a part of it, I like this 5th P because it helps us think about, okay, how will we engage people in supporting this mission? How are we going to communicate it? There was a study done by Lifeway a couple of years ago that revealed that there are now 5 different types of givers in the church. And in the Blueprint Builder, we break down all 5 of those types of givers. But you need to know who those givers are, and you need to know how to specifically develop each one of those givers. You need to know how you help that person go from where they are to where God wants him to be. And you need to know how you can best communicate so that people know how they can be a part of what God is doing, right? You need to be aware of that. So there are a few ways to do this, but I'm just going to give you a sneak peek at one of the strategies that we talk about in the Blueprint Builder and one of the strategies that I give you to really help you get moving forward. And it is this: you need to connect your giving to your going. Connect your giving to your going. What I mean by that is that you need to, every time there is an appeal to give, you need to connect it to going forward in the work that God has called your church to, right? That means, and I'm not talking about you're trying to do this fancy presentation and convince and prod and poke people to give. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about accountability. All right. That's what I'm talking. I'm talking about accountability. I'm talking about saying to people that, yes, we appreciate you giving out of obedience. Yes, we appreciate you giving because the word said that we ought to give, that the word said that the church should be supported by those who is given birth to. All of those things. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is you saying to people, we appreciate you giving for those reasons, but I want you to know how you're making a difference because you give. I want you to know that. And that's important because one of the kind of givers that exist these days, it's what's called split tithers. And these are people who give a portion of their tithe, their giving, their 10%, whatever words you want to use, their generosity goes to the church, but another portion of it goes to organizations that they think are really making a difference. And the rise of this kind of giver in the church reveals that there are some spaces where it's not clear that the church is making a difference. You know, I'm going to tell you, a financial vision of keeping the lights on, even if it's reality, it's not inspiring. Feels like we're sinking resources into a sinking ship. And so what we've got to do is that we've got to frequently communicate to people how their giving is making a real difference in the world. And we've got a couple of different strategies and a couple of different ways that we do this, some ways that we even automate this. I'll just tell you, I did this in a church that I recently pastored, and we almost tripled our budget just by changing the way we communicated about giving. Just by changing the way we communicated with our givers, just by making sure that we thanked them, and we did it all in a way that connected our giving to our going. And I encourage you to do the same thing. All right. So look at this: 5 P's. People, who do you want to reach over the next 12 months? Processes, what are the systems you're going to improve? Projects, what are the events you're going to host to reach your target audience? Preaching, how are you going to preach for life change over the next 12 months? And provision, how are we going to raise and maximize the resources that God has given us? All right, listen, I want you to hear from a leader who is working this thing and walking this thing out in a very, very real way. Check out this quick interview so you can learn some more about what happens within the Blueprint Builder. You know, getting into the future is possible, but what you've got to figure out is how we're going to get there. We've talked a lot about vision, and now we're stepping into planning. When we talk about vision, we're talking about what the future is going to look like when we get there. But when we talk about planning, we're talking about creating a roadmap that will show us step by step how we'll get there. I want to introduce you to a leader who has had to live this and who has had to walk this out as they walk through a pastoral transition and really had to embrace what it means to plan and to be intentional about working into the future. I want to introduce you to Pastor Raymond Hanna. Hey, Pastor Ray, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, man of God?
Man, I'm good. Look, I'm going to call you Pastor Ray for the sake of this interview. But in our house, you're affectionately known as Uncle Ray, right?
Uncle Ray!
Uncle Ray. You know, he got a chance to meet our daughters during the retreat last year. And so they fell in love with Uncle Ray. And so they've got all these different uncles. But man, I'm super excited to have you, man. You know, when I'm thinking about strategic planning, you know, I know we met as you all were getting ready to walk through a pastoral transition. Walk us just a little bit through, you know, what you guys were thinking about and just some of the things that you really were trying to navigate as you prepare for that transition.
Absolutely. First, thank you again for inviting us on here to be a part of this great podcast. We really appreciate it. Referencing your point and your question, you know, I think that was some of the biggest challenges that we had to face was embracing what that transition would look like. We had to really begin to dissect what does that really mean when you're talking about legacy change, right? While legacy and ministry is a blessing, you know, you're gonna have some of those challenges with some of those references or some of those variables. It was a place for us where we really had to begin to say we needed some guidance inside of this transition. The leaders that were there were very helpful, but it was really beneficial to have you as a part of this transition for us. It really kind of gave us the opportunity to have a pattern that
Mm.
was already proven, and someone that could bring wisdom, give insight to help that transition become much easier and successful for us. I hope I hit those points
Yeah.
that you are asking me for.
Absolutely, because I think it was so good. Because I remember when we started walking through transition, I myself was in transition, right? So I had walked through the early stages of a transition, and I was walking through. And I'll take a quick moment and I'll say this to any leader, whether you're in transition because you're passing the baton or you're receiving the baton. I saw something, and you just made reference to this, Pastor Ray. Is there are two seasons that I think are very important on the front end. One season is called Celebrating Our Similarities. And that's where we're all excited about where we know we're alike, the things that will stay the same. But then there's
Correct.
another season called Confronting Our Differences. And that's where we get almost punched in the face with the
Yeah,
places where we're really, really different. And so, one of the things I
absolutely.
would ask with you, Pastor Ray, is as we started to walk through this and we were walking through this transition, and I had a chance to come down and meet with you
Yeah.
guys, and I had a chance to come and be a part of the transition service. I had a chance to just meet all the parties involved. So, I met the people who were handing the baton, and I was working with you all as you received the baton. What were some of the most helpful things that kind of we were able to figure out together in that transition? What were some of the things that really gave you the greatest sense of peace and support?
Well, I think that when you came and you sat down with Pastor Inger and I before the whole transition, just to sit with us, to understand and give us the guidance, you hit on it. That was the best time because you were able to reaffirm with us how we need to approach it. So, like you said, we wanted to let them know what will not change, and then also let this is what will change, but we want to also reinforce and celebrate the legacy of what was there, and we begin to tell the story of what God has done for us. I think that when you came in with you and sitting down with PI and I, it was such a benefit and encouragement. You feel the level of support and care.
Mm,
That was big. To have someone that really cared about a successful succession plan and making sure that not only were we in a place of comfortability, but also the people and those that were passing the baton. Like, I think that sometimes
yeah,
that's a whole nother thing to embrace,
it
not
is.
being able to hold on to the baton anymore. So, so just the transition was so it was seamless in some aspects. It was awakening in others, but it also gave us great vision moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think it sparked a very strong enthusiasm, fire,
Mm.
vigor, drive in the people because they saw what was coming, what was getting ready to happen.
Absolutely. Man, I love that because it's making me think back because I remember so much of the early part of our partnership, we weren't talking about church systems. We weren't talking about processes and all those kind of things. It was personal. As a matter of fact, I remember
Yes,
that one of the things that the Lord said to me in reference to you all is that so much of this next season is about relational warfare. And so we really leaned into that. We spent a lot of time talking. We spent a lot of time having hard conversations with leaders. You know, I even think back to that moment when I came down and I sat in the room like with just you all's team, and we just had some
yes,
really hard conversations. But man, they were so tender because everybody in the room, we just believed, man, we wanted God's best. And
yes.
man, I'm just so grateful to have been a part of that. But tell me this, now that you're on the other side, you and Pastor Inger have really just seen, just so much of a shift. Sometimes a shift, it doesn't start as numerical. And I know you guys have seen some numerical shifts, but it's cultural, right? It's just the
Yes.
the relationships, the attitudes, the way things operate. Now that you're on the other side, what would you share to encourage another leader who is either in transition or preparing for a transition themselves?
The biggest thing for me is that listen to the Father, and inside of listening to the Father, be very mindful to listen to the people and what you have as support of. For an example, I call it a shameless plug, but what Simply Systems has done for us and what it has allowed us to be a part of a network of individuals where we can find and garner that type of support, encouragement. That's what's important, because you get the ability to not only address the different facets of your ministry, but then you also have voices and those that are spiritually sound that will help guide you and support you in that transition or that process. Our culture is very big for us in this particular time. You know, we've seen the impact that Simply Systems has brought to us. We've seen that how it has allowed our membership to our leadership to increase. I've seen great transitions in their servitude to the ministry because of the impact of the trainings, the teachings that we have gotten through a lot of the workshops that we have been a part of and signed up for. All of these different variables, if I was to share it with any leader out there, listen to God, listen to your people, and allow those such as a Henry Talbert and the network that he's connected with to help foster and garner the support that you need in these type of moments when you're talking about transitional moments and moments where it can seem to be lonely. It can seem to be a walk that you feel like I've been left alone inside of this walk, but you haven't been, because God has sent a ram in the bush and a Henry Talbert.
Man, I appreciate that. And you're the perfect person to talk about community. I referenced this in an earlier teaching, but one of the things that I saw not long ago that just did my heart well is I saw you and Pastor Inger travel to go and facilitate the wedding of another couple who was in our program, right? You guys met during the retreat, and to see that you developed that level of relationship, like, it just did my heart so good, man, to see that,
And
man.
it was such an honor to get the phone call and say, hey, this is what we're hearing the Lord say concerning you and PI, Pastor Inger. And we were blown away. But it shows the authenticity, the original, and the real genuine support, love, and care that you develop and build over the course of time working with individuals that are in your network. Right.
Man, listen.
We had a great time. It was awesome.
Man, listen, I'm so grateful. You know, what God does at that Kingdom Clarity Retreat and what he did at that Kingdom Clarity Retreat, you could see, man, you know, for you guys this week and for the house that you guys were in, I'll never forget the first day I came over and I was coming over to speak to everybody and greet. And I just heard prayer coming out the rafters, you know, and I knew then, I said, this group is different. You know, y'all were up there praying with each other and laying hands on each other and stuff. And I looked at Toy, I said, nope. I said, let's go. I said, we not getting in the middle or in the way of what God is doing. Because he's in moments like that. I've seen too many times God uses those moments to meld hearts together. And it's just been so great to see that happen, man. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for your support. I appreciate you. And if you're a pastor out there, man, listen, I want to say to you, if you're a leader wherever you are, I think this is just another point that shows you the value of community. You don't have to do this by yourself. We have tried and we're doing our best to build a community that wants to come alongside you, support you with resources, but also with relationships. And so I want to encourage you to take the next step, really embrace what it means to prepare to succeed. What if God does everything you're asking for? So often we're held back by what if everything goes wrong? But what if everything goes right? I want to encourage you, take the next step. So to summarize, without a strategic plan, your church is planning to fail. And I really want to harp on that word strategic, because a plan says, let's do this. But a strategic plan says, let's do this in the context of considering everything else that we want to do. And so it's making sure that everything fits together in a way that's going to serve your church and serve the kingdom of God best going into the future. All right. So you got to get you a plan. You need to pull your team together. You need to plan together, bring them in. You'll be surprised at how many amazing things come out when a team sits down to intentionally plan together. Listen, if you really want to move this thing forward and you want to take the next step, if you thought that framework using the 5 Ps was really good, then I've got something special for you. It's called the Blueprint Builder. And the Blueprint Builder is that framework on steroids. There's an entire course that I've put together that will walk you through it step by step, that will give you a breakdown of how to put all this together. But the big piece of this Blueprint Builder that I think you'll really love is that I'm going to give you the template. I'm going to give you a document that you can just go in and edit and change and make your own. And by the time you're done with that course, by the time you're done with that Blueprint Builder, you'll have an entire document that you can share with your team, share with your church, so that you all can take the next step and everybody can be on the same page. Listen, we do this every year at our annual retreat. We do our Kingdom Clarity or our Kingdom Advance retreat. And when we go away for that retreat, we spend about 7 days in a beach house in Destin, Florida with leaders in our church systems boot camp. And every leader walks away with a customized version of that strategic plan. And listen to me, it makes all the difference. There's not been a single year that we've done it so far that pastors did not leave with tears in their eyes because the rest of their year was so clarified that it made everything so simple and freed them up to really be the creative people that they're called to be. And I believe the same can be true for you, that you're a creative leader. But one of the things that happens is that pressure and stress has a way of squeezing the creativity out of you. And so we want to help pour it back into you. So go over to getchurchsystems.com and you can learn some more about the Blueprint Builder, all right? So I want you to stay tuned because in our next episode, I'm going to talk to you about breaking a significant growth barrier. The episode is going to be breaking the 100 barrier. I'm going to show you what keeps most churches small, but then I'm also going to show you how you can begin to take the steps to begin to prepare your church to break through that barrier and start moving towards 200 in your weekend attendance. So if your church is 100 people or less, you don't want to miss that episode. It's going to be absolutely critical for you. All right, listen, I hope this was a blessing to you. Until next time, keep the gears turning. Peace.